Former President Jacob Zuma still appealing a court ruling which set aside his medical parole. He was imprisoned 15 months ago, you'll remember, and would have been released today had he stayed in prison. But he was released on medical parole. Now, the High Court in Pretoria set aside that decision, ordering him back to prison. Let's get more now on what the latest is and perhaps the way forward. Ziyanda Ngcobo watching that space for us. Good morning to you.
Morning. Let's
start with the former president, Jacob Zuma. Today, essentially a free man, but can we say that definitively, given that High Court ruling, which the former president is appealing at the Supreme Court?
So we're still waiting, the outcomes of the Supreme Court of Appeal hearing. You'll recall that was last month, where the former president was actually appealing to the court, not to overturn Arthur Fraser's decision to grant him medical parole. The critical thing about this court hearing is that a request from the Helen Suzman Foundation to say that the time that the former president has spent on medical parole not be counted as a part of the 15-month jail sentence, which would mean if the Supreme Court of Appeal upholds the earlier High Court ruling, the former president could then be going back to the Escort Correctional Facility. Now, he had already served a month and a half of his prison sentence. And so if he were to go back, he'd only have to stay about another month and a half before he qualifies for normal parole and not the medical parole. But very critical here, of course, Toli, when you're granted medical parole, you need to be either physically incapacitated or terminally ill. And this is critical because the former president has now said in that statement that he is putting his hand up and he would not decline if he were nominated as national chair of the ANC. So there are questions around, are you still terminally ill or physically incapacitated or not? And if you're not, then or if you are, how are you then standing to become national chair of the ANC, which, of course, we know the step-aside rule would also disqualify the former president.
Where do prison authorities stand here, Ziyanda? Because they are also part and parcel of this equation.
So they did form part of those hearings in Bloemfontein last month, where they also had to submit, reasons for why they granted the former president medical parole. Remember that Arthur Fraser activated a part in the Correctional Services Act, which empowers the National Commissioner to grant medical parole. However, within that particular clause of the Correctional Services Act, there needs to be a justification. And one of the critical things that the justices were sharply raising consistently was that how are we supposed to know whether this decision was rational or lawful if we don't even know the nature of the condition that is being faced by the former president? Because in the medical reports by Mpatswe and Mafa, the doctors who assessed him, the medical records, there are parts of it that are redacted. So in terms of the rationality of the decision of Arthur Fraser, they're unable then to determine whether or not, it was based on the prescripts that you need to follow when you grant someone medical parole.
So, might we expect the former president up and about, outside of Ngandla, campaigning? He's put his hand up, as you said, to say, I'm available for the position of chairperson, which the branches of the ANC, he says, some of which have approached him to say, would he possibly stand? He says, yes. Does that mean that he is going to perhaps be seen on public platforms now? But what might that do for prison authorities? Because remember, they've let him out based on what was said to be medical parole for someone who is either terminally ill or physically incapacitated. Surely that's going to be embarrassing for them.
No, it's not, because the 15-month sentence, the actual 15-month sentence is over. Former President Jacob Zuma was jailed. He was sent to jail for 15 months for being in contempt of court. So the medical parole thing came in the midst of him already serving his prison sentence. So insofar as the actual sentence, it's done. He was arrested on
But what about physical incapacity or possibly being terminally
Well,
ill.
that would be an embarrassment. And you remember that Singabako was not the spokesperson of the Correctional Services Department, was non-committal. We still don't know, even as the media, is it due to his terminal illness or physical incapacity? They never actually stipulated what the basis for granting the former president medical parole, and perhaps maybe they knew that this decision would come under litigation at some stage or the other. So insofar as him being able to participate in party activities, he's absolutely got a right from where I'm sitting to participate and be active in politics of the ANC. I suspect we'll see a lot of that in KwaZulu-Natal, given how the province seemingly snubbed his wisdom and his advice that they back Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma to become president of the ANC, and instead went for Dr. Zweli Mkhize. So the dynamic is very different, even if you look at the position that the former president was in last year, almost having somewhat of a martyr status. All those crowds outside his Nkandla home just before his arrest, the July civil unrest, which to a degree has been attributed to his arrest. Vis-a-vis now, it's 2022, and it doesn't seem like even the structures in his former stronghold are even listening to what he has to say. So how he participates will be interesting to see. The extent to which he participates will also be interesting to see as well.
Well, I am reminded of the Shabir Sheikh matter.
Yes.
Out and about, playing golf, we were told, after we were
Hitting
told
journalists
as well.
in between.
You and I are going to get ourselves into trouble. Let's talk about the cabinet reshuffles that are ongoing in various provinces. Limpopo, first out of the starting blocks.
Yeah.
The Premier there mounting a cabinet reshuffle. You will let us in on whether this has to do with delivering services or is it political pressure from the newly constituted PEC there. Then you have Gauteng, include Mpumalanga in there, where there is talk of a cabinet reshuffle. What's going on?
I think what we're seeing now, I find the timing of these reshuffles very interesting because they're just before the 55th National Conference, and we know that a lot of, the power bases and the negotiations are around who brings what to the table in terms of numbers. So Limpopo is very interesting because they have been very clear from the time even when they held their own provincial elective conference that they want then to elect Stan Mathabata to become chairperson of the province so that when it comes to the lobbying and the jostling that he become national chair of the ANC come the 55th National Conference. It's been part of the discussions that Limpopo's had with KwaZulu-Natal. Limpopo's been in discussions with the Eastern Cape. They've been in discussions with Mpumalanga, for example, and KwaZulu-Natal to negotiate, various positions. Hence, you would have seen them, the name of Stan Mathabata also cropping up on the slate of KwaZulu-Natal, for an example. So what we're seeing now is, you'll remember that Stan Mathabata as well, it's one of those PECs as well where he's outnumbered, so to speak, in terms of the slate that he's on. Hence, you saw the return of Florence Radilani, who had to step aside because of her implication in the VBS scandal. She has now got an MEC post. It's the first time she's going to be MEC. She was the mayor of Bembe. So
that's a bigger responsibility, a bigger budget.
It's a bigger budget, and so what I'm saying here is that this has got more to do with the internal dynamics within the organization than it actually does to do with service delivery. I wonder how the residents of Limpopo would have received that when that report then by Advocate Mutao had said that she had interfered, political interference, insofar as where the monies went. The same thing with Naledi Kekana, who as well was said to have deposited the money when she knew that she was not supposed to have deposited the money into VBS, also has a new MEC post. But of course, maybe the decision making, and it can be safely assumed that Stan Mathabata had to think about him being pushed to a national, and so having to ensure that within his own organization, everybody is satisfied. A similar case in, Gauteng. We're expecting Bangazeli Sufi to reshuffle his cabinet this afternoon, and we'll see then who gets placed where. And I mean, this is also in anticipation of the president himself also sort of accommodating David Makura now that his own province has pushed him out, so he needs to be accommodated somewhere. And the president earlier this week not being drawn on whether or not he'll be filling the public service and administration post, which has been left vacant because of Ayanda Dlodlo leaving. But there's already talk that he may become the new Minister of Trade and Industry.
We shall see what happens. Ziyanda Ngcobo, thank you very much. Always keeping a beady eye on the political space. Thank you very much for the time being.